Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's April 27th, 2019. Right now we're having a bit of a snowstorm going on outside, and so I thought I'd come in and try and create a video that would talk about the integration of several different systems that we use on site that I believe are responsible for the gradual transformation of a depleted old farmland that had new growth forest on it with mostly ash trees that became susceptible to the emerald ash boring insect, and so we have lost thousands of trees here on site. But it's all on a gravel bed. In our environment, we've had many of our neighbors have to purchase water to put water in their wells, where many years ago our water table was much higher. And so there's several things that have evolved that have helped us to create a really resilient, productive homestead, farm, garden, living center here. And what I wanted to do was to approach this video to be somewhat of a fallback or introduction to the integration of multiple systems, because often I'll be talking about Hugekultur or permaculture or passive solar design or market gardening, permanent raised beds, all of those items which seem so separate and detached. Whereas I look at it as this whole property is an organism or a superorganism, and there are many systems that work together, and it's a whole systems design or whole systems approach that we use in order to have created so much success in growing and harvesting energy, harvesting food, harvesting water here on the property as well. And so I thought I'd make a video that talks about this whole systems approach and the integration of some of the systems. So when we're talking about a whole systems approach, we're talking about elements, which can be anything from a building to a pond to a permanent raised bed or whatever, and functions, elements and functions. So what are the functions of each one of those elements? And ideally in permaculture, we think about each element should perform multiple function, and every function should have redundancy by other elements providing that function as well. So there's a redundancy, a resiliency to any sort of disruptive force that enters a system and destroys things, such as a weather event or whatever, what have you. So that's the whole systems approach. An example of looking at the integration of different systems, we can look at human or animal bodies. So we can talk about the integumentary system. So we can talk about skin and hair and scales and feathers and hooves, those sorts of things that provide functions such as a protective layer, but that's part of our integumentary system. Then we have a muscular system, which could be subdivided into skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, or smooth muscles that help to maintain pressures in our vascular system and to help to propel food in our digestive system. We can talk about our nervous system, from the central nervous system, our brain and spinal cord, to our peripheral nervous system, to our autonomic nervous system. So as I'm going through this, it isn't just a system. That system has multiple systems within it and other elements that provide many functions. And then we have a circulatory system. We think about the heart, the arteries, the capillaries, and the veins. And most people think about the heart as being the most important element, but your capillaries are what do the greatest, the most beneficial exchanges that are necessary to sustain life. Now, all of the systems together are necessary, and that's important to think about. The lymphatic system, where we think about the lymph nodes and the lymph vessels and its function in the immune system and in the circulatory system. Our respiratory system, going from our nose, our mouth, our pharynx, our larynx, our trachea, our bronchi, our bronchioles, our alveoli, which are responsible for the gas exchange, expelling CO2 and bringing in oxygen to load the red blood cells. So our endocrine system, which and we could say endocrine and reproductive system. So our hypothalamus, our pituitary, our adrenal glands, our parathyroids, our thyroid, our ovaries, our testicles, and all of these are part of the endocrine and slash reproductive system as well. And then we have the urinary or excretory system, including the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, the urethra. And then we have the digestive system, going from the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder, the large intestine, right out to the anus as well. So we can break a whole organism down and look at them as far as the groups of components that we label as systems, and then we can further subdivide those and think about each of those subcomponents and their functions and how their functions interrelate with the other components of the other systems. And I hope this isn't going too far with this whole analogy, but I wanted to at least start off with that because that's how I look at things, whether I'm doing a building or putting in a garden or putting in a food forest, whatever it may be. I approach it just like I did medicine, really looking at the whole and then taking all of that information of what's going on in the environment, and I won't go through all that right now, and then ultimately getting down to where we know what the normal function, the normal physiology, the normal anatomy is, and looking at what's disruptive, what isn't functioning appropriately, what system is that, where is the redundancy with that, what went wrong with the systems. So over the years, and just recently, I should have posted a introductory to a series of videos that would be Hugekultur videos. And I've made a series of videos in the past on permaculture. And I think over time, over the next few years, I'll be making a series of videos on each one of these systems that I'm going to be talking about now. So, and I've taken a couple notes here. The first one is market gardening. Now, I'm not a market gardener. In other words, I don't go to the farmer's market and sell produce there. I don't have a relationship with stores where I'm selling it. I don't have a community-sponsored food system for people, CSAs and all. But there are many components of the market gardening system that we've incorporated, and it has accomplished multiple goals, such as while using things like the 30-inch standard permanent raised beds with minimum tillage, using the bio-intensive method of really maximizing the square foot. And there are places where I diverge from some of these components, but I'm just sharing some of the core features of market gardening. Using cover crops to build soil, weed control with weed mats, irrigation systems, whether on timers for either drip irrigation or overhead irrigation, crop planning, certainly wash stations and crop processing systems as well. So that's one of the systems that you've seen videos where the permanent raised beds, when I've set these systems up and we show throughout the season the various progress that the gardens are going through, and why we're planting, why we're doing some rotations with our crops in different locations and all. That's all comes from the market gardening systems that I've talked about in the past with J.M. Fortier or Elliot Coleman. Those key individuals have written books and have extensive knowledge on these systems. Another system that we incorporate here is the Hugekultur systems, which is just simply dirt-covered carbonaceous woody materials, papers and wood is how things are thought about. And hopefully a video just went up explaining a little bit about the first video and a number of videos that will be coming on the hugekultur systems that we use here. Now we gravitate towards hugekultur pit systems, where we're taking everything that's dead and dying. Like I mentioned early on in this video, we lost so many thousands of trees to the emerald ash boring insect. And all of those trees could be put into large burning piles, but what we're doing instead, including the root balls, we're digging up these areas, and we're doing some earthworks and permaculture work in these areas as well. But we're taking all of the wood from the small branches to the large trees, and we're coppicing many of the trees that we've been growing for several years, and all of those materials from the large root balls to the trunks of the trees to the small branches to the tiny little new growth limbs and to the coppice materials are all going back into hugekultur pits. They're anywhere from probably only 4 feet down or 3 feet down all the way down to about 11 feet buried underground. And this system certainly captures water. It creates entire ecosystems, subterranean system. It captures and sequesters carbon and other nutrients. It's revitalizing and enriching the soils on our property. We have a very, very large area, multiple acres, where these hugekultur systems have been put in. And you'd never know that it's a hugekultur system because it just looks like a permaculture site or a relatively flat growing site where there's permanent raised beds on the surface of it. But this is all displaced, all of that coarse gravel and stone, which has been used in other parts of the property to change the contour and the hardscapes of the property. And all of that material, which would have been put in big burning piles and been burnt over a few year period of time. So the hugekultur systems that we're using is another system. It's not the one that you're going to be reading about and seeing on most YouTube videos, but it's a system that really requires no maintenance after it's established. There's quite a bit of work to get it established, but there's no repetitive work over time with these hugekultur pits. Another system that we're incorporating, and I'm going to call it Back to Eden. It actually isn't exactly like and I'm not sure exactly what the Back to Eden method is, but my understanding is that that aged wood chips that have been piled and partially decomposed are used to remulch the surface of the soil to promote weed suppression and to provide nutrients to the fungal organisms, and certainly some of the bacteria such as actinomyces, a chain sort of forming bacteria that really helps to degrade many of the plant pathogens that could end up going into a system. So these Back to Eden or heavy mulching systems, we're going anywhere from 6 inches deep in our Back to Eden systems to about 3 feet deep with these wood chips. And now the wood chips certainly will break down. When it's 3 feet, it ends up being about over a several year period, being down to about 8, 9, maybe 10 inches deep. But even that soil below it, as all of that the carbon-rich nutrients that are there get incorporated by the microorganisms and the earthworms down deeper into the to the underlying ground surface, which in our case is gravel in this area. So that's another system that's really important, and that system goes on top of our hugekultur system. So we first bury all of that material, and then we start laying on the layers of, and we use dirt to fill back in on top of it and put multiple layers of wood material from all sizes in the hugekultur subterranean systems. And then we start wood chipping it and bringing deeper and deeper levels of wood chips in there. And then ultimately later on, we do some, we incorporate permaculture systems as well, which is a whole entire system, and it's another whole system, science-based system where we use where we utilize the natural. We do a sector analysis looking at, geez, what's the solar exposure, where are the winds coming from, the cold winter winds, what's the climate, what's the topography. We look at all of the elements that affect the site, including the soil type, the water level, the materials that are here, the roadways nearby, all of the features around, and we take that into consideration, and we do planning of where the living structures will be, if there's animals on site, where those housing will be, the garden sites, the food forests, all of those different things. And we've talked about many of these things in the past. So we incorporate permaculture. And a big part of the permaculture systems that we've established here, once we've done the Hugekultur systems and we've got the back to Eden or the permanent mulching systems that go above that surface, we also do cut in ponds, swales, and canals into these systems. So now that we've got this subterranean level, and then we have a surface level, we're sculpting the land to maximize our harvesting of water and nutrients and bring that through a whole circuit system where we try to maintain all of the nutrients on the water as long in the property as possible and prevent it from going down the slope of the property and bring it back, if you will, almost uphill. It really isn't uphill, but one would think that by looking at the mapping of how the water flows on our property, because it goes from east to west and the slope is to the southwest. So by using permaculture and our canals, ponds, swales systems, and dam systems, that leads us to our next system that's there, and it's a bioremediation system. So as a result of being in the location, we have a old town landfill that's right up against our property. There's farmers that have been using pesticides all around. I'm sure pesticides were used on this property at one point in time. There's pollutants. We're in the country. There's people who burn their trash in burning barrels. There's all sorts of things that are going on in the area, and these things all ultimately get into the water. And so what we've designed our ponds, swales, and canals to create sediment traps and bioremediation systems. So our bioremediation systems utilize a couple of canal systems and a swale system that where we've incorporated some of the natural organisms, be it plant life, microbial communities from mycology, from fungal consuming organisms, fungal bioremediation systems, to micro bioremediators of bacteria as well, and certainly phytoremediation with the plant systems and all. So what we're doing is taking all of those organic wastes that have been deposited in the earth, that have been spilled onto the surface. It comes through the air, attaches to the leaves of the plants, falls in the fall leaves. What the fungi don't break down in the leaf mulch, some of those leaves end up going into the canal systems. All of this material is being bioremediated, making harmful, dangerous organic compounds and neutralizing them to being their inert, in a sense, organic compounds that benefit and build soil. So we have soil harvesting systems as a result, and we have purified water as a result of going through the bioremediation systems as well. And that goes to further canal systems, which keeps that water back on the property. And all of this can be slowly recharging the aquifers as well, because that's a big part of what we're trying to do by not burning all that wood or using all that energy, using fossil fuels, using nuclear energy, burning the brush piles and burning the woods, we're preventing our contribution to climate change. We're sequestering these all of these carbonaceous units and putting it into the soil. We're neutralizing some of the potentially harmful organic compounds that go through the systems. We're purifying water and recharging the aquifers and doing our best for not just our ethics are self-care, earth care, people care, and future care. So all of these systems are geared not just for our own benefit, for our own well-being, but to not only do as little harm to other people and other creatures around this beautiful planet, but also do the best that we can to foster aid as well. We also, you'll see there's quite a few videos that I've done on our composting systems as well. This is a way of trying to neutralize weed seeds and devitalize pathogens, and using what would otherwise be waste that might end up in a landfill, and using these to build soil. And that's what feeds back to our permanent raised beds and our handicapped gardens. All of those systems and nutrition for our food forest and our future you-pick gardens as well. Another thing that's really important in what we're doing is so the Earthworks, and that's the creation of these large Hugekultur pits, creating ponds and dams and swales and canal systems. These are all part of Earthworks, which is intimately associated with permaculture. And in a simple sense, it's like extreme landscaping in a sense, but it's done with a whole system approach to do as much good for self-care. And when I say self-care, I really mean less effort on our part to maintain more resilience to the system, so we don't have to go back and repair systems. Beyond being sustainable, we want it to be able to bounce back when there's a catastrophic insult as well. So there's so many things that I think about when I'm talking about Earthworks. That's where we build our bioremediation systems as well. Another thing that we do when we're building our Earthworks, we're incorporating, like I've made videos before, with a Hugekultur terrace that's attached to a canal system that's alongside of one of our access roads here on the property. And it's in an area where there's a microclimate being created as well. And this dynamic interaction of the Hugekultur terrace with nutrients potentially working its way downhill going into the canal system, and that canal system's used for soil harvesting, and we use the mini excavator to harvest the soil from that system. But inside of that canal system is one of the very first early in the spring emergence of many beneficial insects, toads, frogs, aquatic species, and reptilian species, amphibians, that come alive all along in that, because that in a sense is a hardscape, or similar to a hedgerow, where we're creating habitats and locations for niches for the most desirable species that complement all of the things we have around here. The one thing I haven't solved yet is the punkies, the black flies that come out in the spring. The swallows are back and that's really wonderful, but we have a couple week span where that's a real challenge, but they're a vital nutrient source for many of these critters that I'm talking about. We don't have problems with mosquitoes here because of the way that our aquatic systems are so healthy, with such a diversity of species in these systems that really help tremendously. They also help to control the pests in the gardens. So when I first started gardening, it seemed like the bane of my existence were weeds and pests. And we have very little, knock on wood, we have very few problems with weeds and pests since we've integrated, and that's really important, the integration of all of these systems to create a whole organism. Our property is a large organism, and we're just mere little orchestra leaders helping to direct the flow of energies, and by recognizing what the natural cycles are through our sector analysis as well. Let me see, did I cover most of the things? We also have part of our integration of systems is our rainwater harvesting system. So that mulching system that we talked about with the Back to Eden system, the Hugekultur systems, these are huge initial reservoirs and then long-term reservoirs, the Hugekultur pit system, and then the canal systems and the swale systems and the ponds are long-term systems as well that help to ultimately charge the aquifers. But we've reduced, we used to have, when we first started developing this area, especially after we started putting in lawns and all, well, when we'd have these tremendous spring thaws and floods and all, I mean, the water would just run across the surface of the property and run right off. And now that just doesn't happen. Each year we take further steps to enhance these systems. So rainwater harvesting is a very important part of what we're doing. And in the future, right now, water is a major concern around the world. We're blessed here in the United States with our blessed and cursed with our municipal water systems, because our municipal water systems do not provide us with safe drinking water. And even our bottled water, for the most part, in many cases, isn't safe drinking water as well. So realizing the limited amount of fresh drinking water that we have available to us by reducing runoff or non-point sources of pollution, increasing our absorptive capacities on the property, storage capacities, and purification through bioremediation, and then ultimately gradual and progressive recharging of the aquifer with good water is an important part of what we're doing here. So sorry about that break. The video stopped recording on me, so we're starting over again with the energy efficient design system here on site. So when we think about the energy efficient design, it's both in the buildings that we're building and outside of the buildings as well. Whether it's living fences or like in the building. So we have a passive solar home with south-facing windows. We're utilizing natural lighting. The internal lighting inside is all energy efficient lighting, LED lights. But mostly we want to depend on our external lighting as well. Our appliances are energy efficient. This is a passive solar home, so it's super insulated, maximizing thermal barriers, vapor barriers, water barriers, and air infiltration barriers. So we're controlling the internal environment in such a way that we're promoting a very healthy living environment with multiple animals and ourselves living in here. We're constantly cleaning the air, and unfortunately many homes that are airtight homes and energy efficient homes, it can be a very polluted environment based on what materials you're using in your house, what the functions and the constituents are in your furniture and your carpets, all of these things. So we have a very energy efficient design system. We use a large thermal battery underground, a thermal mass unit, where the hot air is sucked off of the ceiling, the cathedral ceiling, through a couple of chimneys, brought down and stored in a thermal mass, a large battery unit, and that helps to equalize. So during the winter months, we're taking that warm air that's put into the battery system and warming the environmental temperatures. During the summer months, when it's very hot, that circulation takes the heat, puts it not outside, but puts it right down into the thermal mass unit to store, and the relatively cool thermal energy coming from the mass, 70, 80 degrees, which is nice during the winter months, and it's also nice during the hot summer months as well. We're also preheating our water system by just using the house's natural temperature. So let's say at the peak of the house, It's 80 degrees. That's where we have a couple of large tanks. So we take our well water, which may be 50 degrees Fahrenheit, bring it up into the peak, put it in these 2 large storage tanks, and that gradually raises, going from one tank to the next, up to about 80 degrees at the peak, and therefore that feeds into our hot water tank. And that hot water system only has to raise the temperature from 80 degrees Fahrenheit to 125 or 130 degrees Fahrenheit as well. So we're utilizing many energy efficient designs, be it super insulation, thermal batteries, all of those things, and that's even in our chicken coop. Our chicken coop never got below freezing. It got to freezing, 32 degrees Fahrenheit this winter, but there's no heating source going in there at all, and that chicken coop is right up against the western, it's the most western part of that structure, and that gets those cold westward winds hitting those old type windows, probably 30-year-old windows that we put in there. But it's super insulated, and it's using the thermal energy that's stored in a relatively small thermal mass unit there. The greenhouse has a very large thermal mass unit, much larger than our house here, and that's going to help to neutralize some of the extremes of temperature during our cold, cloudy, long winters that we experience here in the northeastern part of the United States near the Great Lakes. So utilizing a system like that is also an integral part of the whole system design. And then I wrote one more, capturing and storing energy. I talked about capturing and storing carbon energy, capturing and storing water energy as well. We have passive, we talked about the capture and storage of passive solar energy with our house. Well, we also have a full photovoltaic system, enough solar panels that provide more than the amount of electricity that we use here. Unfortunately, our winters are very dark and long here where we live because there's so much cloud cover, so they don't produce as much energy as we need in the winter. But during the summer months, it produces an abundance of electricity. But over a 365-day period, we produce more. There's a net gain as opposed to a net loss. And so we are grid tied to help the grid take all that excess energy and provide us with an equal amount of cost for what we're producing. So that's a good system. We also have solar thermal heaters as well, and we're using a passive solar greenhouse with our Harbor Freight, but our passive solar greenhouse with our big greenhouse that'll be going up soon will be another system. And then we'll have high tunnels which can extend our growing season during the winter months. I haven't got those installed yet as well. So I just wanted to mention how the whole systems approach is responsible. It isn't just permaculture, it isn't just hugekultur, it isn't just the mulching or back to Eden system, it isn't the canal and swale systems, it isn't the passive solar design of the home. It's the integration and the multi elements and their multiple functions that work together to increase the resiliency of our whole systems. So I hope that this format of me presenting this information in this way isn't overly boring, and it provides a resource to come back to when I'm doing a series on hugekultur, I'm doing a series on the market gardening techniques, or I'm talking about the food forest and the components of the food forest. It's really easy to think of the food forest as being just an element, an entity unto its own. It's an integral part of the canal, the pond systems, the hugekultur systems. All of these components interrelate and feed the system. It's like the cycle of life or the nutrient cycles. Often it's easy to see the bird, the caterpillar, the bird that consumes the caterpillar that consumes the plant, but we may not be seeing all of the things that are going down under the earth and as they all relate, and it's a continuous cycling system. And as I'm developing and going through this whole system, I'm looking at how each element is going to be integrated and how it will complement and provide more resilience to the other systems. So if you found this video of value, please give us a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. Share this with your friends. It helps us to grow as a channel. That's one of my goals, is to help to share what we're doing here, other than people coming here, but to at least get some information on how the systems like this work. It isn't just putting in a permanent raised bed and that solves all your problems. It's the integration of systems. Well, thanks so much for watching, folks, and have a fantastic day. Bye-bye now.